It is early morning in the Persian Gulf. The sun has not yet risen over the Zagros Mountains. The water is flat, the air is still. And moving through the darkness, in a column stretching 20 kilometers, is the largest American amphibious assault force assembled since the beaches of Kuwait in 1991. USS Tripoli leads the formation, the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, the 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, elements of the 82nd Airborne, HIMARS batteries, Apache gunships, F-35Bs cycling off the deck, 16,000 American fighters in total moving toward the Iranian coast. In Washington, Trump has called it the masterstroke, the move that ends this war in days. Seize Kharg Island, strangle Iran's oil exports, force the Strait of Hormuz open, and declare victory before the month is out. In Tel Aviv, Netanyahu's war cabinet has signed off. The ground operation will finish what the air campaign started. Iran is broken, Iran is bleeding, one final push, and the regime collapses. In Tehran, in a bunker somewhere beneath the Zagros rock, where no American bomb has ever reached Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is watching the same scene unfold on radar screens. And he is smiling, because for 40 years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has been building exactly one thing in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz, the perfect killing ground. And 16,000 American Marines just sailed into it. Welcome to the Jiang Report. I am Professor Jiang Xueqin. And today we are going to talk about the strategic catastrophe that Washington refused to see coming, the ambush that didn't just stop Trump's ground invasion. It ended America's illusion that it could impose its will on Iran through military force. And in doing so, it left Israel, the country this war was fought, to protect, standing completely alone. Stay with me. What you are about to hear will reframe everything you think you know about this war. First, we are going to examine the trap itself, not in vague terms, but in precise tactical and operational detail. The IRGC has spent 4 decades designing the Strait of Hormuz as a kill zone specifically optimized to destroy American amphibious forces. We are going to walk through every layer of that kill zone: the swarm boats, the mines, the coastal missile batteries, the drone swarms, the underground bunkers, and explain why American military planners either could not see it or chose not to see it. Second, we will examine the American force composition. 16,000 Marines and paratroopers sounds formidable. Against an open adversary in open terrain, it is. Against Iran's layered area denial architecture, in the most geographically constrained maritime environment in the world, we will let the math speak for itself. Third, we will look at Trump's strategic collapse, because the ambush at Hormuz is not just a military failure. It is the failure of a political strategy built on the belief that Iran could be forced into submission by a show of force. That belief is now in ruins, and the political consequences in Washington are only beginning to unfold. Fourth, we will examine what this means for Israel. Because Israel launched this war, or at least co-launched it, on the premise that American military power would do what Israel's military power alone could not: permanently destroy Iran's ability to threaten the Jewish state. If American ground power has now been bloodied and humiliated in the Strait of Hormuz, Israel is left holding a war it cannot finish and cannot walk away from. And finally, the global picture. Because China, Russia, and every country watching from the sidelines just received the clearest signal since the fall of Saigon about the limits of American military reach. Let us get into it. Before we dive in, if you are new to the Jiang Report, please subscribe right now. We do not cover the headlines here. We do not tell you what happened. We tell you why it happened, what it means, and where it is going. That requires depth, patience, and intellectual honesty that most news sources will not give you. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and let us begin. To understand the ambush, you have to understand what drove the decision to launch a ground operation in the first place. Because from the outside, the decision looks reckless. From the inside, from Washington's perspective in late March 2026, it looked like the only move left. Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th with an air campaign of staggering scale. In the first 48 hours alone, over 1,250 targets were struck across Iran. The Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was killed in the opening salvo. 2/3 of Iran's air defense systems were destroyed. Iran's conventional navy, its frigates, destroyers, corvettes, was systematically hunted and sunk. CENTCOM declared the IRGC's naval capability in the Gulf of Oman neutralized within the first week. By every traditional metric of air power dominance, the campaign was succeeding. And yet 5 weeks in the war had not ended. The The Strait of Hormuz was still closed. Oil prices had hit $114 per barrel. Nearly 2,000 ships were stranded in the Persian Gulf. Southeast Asia was experiencing fuel rationing. Qatar, host to the largest American airbase in the Middle East, had been struck by Iranian missiles. 6 American service members were dead. The political timetable Trump had set 4 to 5 weeks was running out. And here is the intelligence reality that made the ground operation feel necessary. Roughly half of Iran's missile launchers were still intact. CNN reported on April 2nd, citing 3 sources familiar with the intelligence assessment, that Iran still possessed thousands of one-way attack drones and that its coastal cruise missile capabilities were largely untouched because the U.S. air campaign had focused on ballistic missile sites, not coastal defense systems. The IRGC still had, according to the second source, hundreds, if not thousands, of small boats and unmanned surface vessels. The air campaign had degraded Iran's ability to strike Israel and Gulf states. It had not degraded Iran's ability to control the Strait of Hormuz. And so the ground option, the one that military planners, think tanks, and former CENTCOM commanders had been gaming out for years, moved from contingency to plan. Trump had already deployed 2 Marine expeditionary units to theater. The 31st MEU aboard USS Tripoli, with roughly 3,500 sailors and Marines, arrived first. The 11th MEU aboard USS Boxer followed. Elements of the 82nd Airborne's 1st Brigade Combat Team, America's premier rapid deployment force, were dispatched alongside them. Additional Marines were ordered to theater, building the total American amphibious and airborne force to over 16,000 combat-ready personnel. The Soufan Center, citing the Washington Post, reported that the Pentagon had prepared detailed plans for weeks of ground operations centered on Kharg Island, Iran's primary oil export hub, through which 85 to 90% of Iranian crude transits. Former CENTCOM Commander General Joseph Votel estimated publicly that 1,500 Marines could secure the island. Seize Kharg, the logic ran, and Iran loses its economic lifeline. Seize Kharg, and Iran's negotiating position collapses. Seize Kharg, and Trump gets his victory image, the Marine Corps flag planted on Iranian soil, the strait reopened, the regime humiliated into capitulation. It was a clean, logical plan. And Iran had seen it coming for decades. The killing ground. 4 decades of preparation. This is the part of the story that Western analysis almost universally misses. Because Western analysts look at the Strait of Hormuz and see a waterway, a choke point, a geographic vulnerability to be exploited. Iran looks at the Strait of Hormuz and sees a fortress. The IRGC has spent 40 years, not months, not years, but 4 full decades building the Strait of Hormuz into the most lethal anti-access, area denial environment ever constructed by a non-superpower military. Every strategic calculation, every weapons procurement, every tunnel dug and island fortified in those 40 years was oriented around one specific scenario: an American amphibious assault force attempting to pass through or seize control of the strait. The IRGC controls 3 major island fortresses positioned directly over the shipping lanes. Abu Musa, the early warning sentinel, extends Iran's radar coverage and missile reach deep into the Gulf, detecting incoming American vessels long before they reach striking range. Keshm, the largest island in the Persian Gulf, at nearly 600 square miles of rugged terrain, serves as the IRGC's primary military hub, a labyrinth of underground bunkers, mobile anti-ship missile launchers, drone bases, and coastal radar installations. And Larak, positioned like a knife at the throat of the transit corridor, stages IRGC fast attack boats that can reach a passing ship in minutes. 0 reaction time for the target, 0 margin for the crew. The defensive architecture layered across these positions is not improvised. It is not reactive. It is purpose-built for exactly the scenario that Trump ordered. Layer 1, the swarm boats. The IRGC deploys fleets of small, radar-evading speedboats capable of 50 to 70 knots. 10 to 20 boats simultaneously swarm a single target from 360 degrees. They target the bridge to blind the ship and the engine room to kill propulsion. Against a cargo tanker, this is a harassment tactic. Against an amphibious assault vessel carrying Marines, it is the opening move in an annihilation sequence. And in the chaos of a multi-directional swarm attack at close range, American rules of engagement designed to minimize civilian casualties and prevent escalation become a liability rather than an asset. Layer 2, the mines. Multiple reports from CNN and Reuters, citing sources familiar with U.S. intelligence, confirmed that Iran had begun laying mines in the strait. The US military destroyed 16 Iranian mine layers near the strait on March 11, but destroying mine layers after they have deployed mines is like destroying the printer after the counterfeit bills have been circulated. The mines remain, and the Strait of Hormuz, at its narrowest point, is only 21 miles wide, with shipping confined to 2 designated lanes. Threading 16,000 Marines through a mine channel while under fire is not a military operation. It is an execution. Layer 3. The coastal missile batteries. This is where the IRGC's preparation becomes most lethal for an amphibious operation. Deep inside hardened mountain bunkers along the Iranian coast bunkers, specifically designed to survive American airstrikes, Iran has positioned its coastal cruise missile arsenal. The P-15 Termit anti-ship missile. The Noor, an Iranian copy of the Chinese C-802. The Qaeda and the Nazar, both with active guidance systems capable of terminal maneuvering to defeat ship-based countermeasures. CENTCOM employed GBU, 7.2 penetrator munitions, 5,000-pound bombs designed to punch through 20 feet of solid reinforced concrete against underground missile silos along the Iranian coast on March 17. The results degraded, but did not eliminate, Iran's coastal strike capability. CNN's intelligence sources confirmed that the coastal cruise missile capabilities were largely still intact because they had not been the primary focus of the air campaign. And those capabilities had retreated deeper underground during the 5 weeks of strikes, making them progressively harder to locate and target. Layer 4. The drone swarms. Iran has thousands of small drones launched from hundreds of dispersed sites. Explosive drone boats disguised as fishing vessels. First-person view drones identical to the systems Ukraine has used to devastate Russian armor. Iranian drone boats using encryption and frequency-hopping communications that complicate electronic jamming. A USAN TPY-2 radar installation was damaged by Iranian drone attacks during the campaign, demonstrating that even America's advanced sensor architecture is not immune. Now visualize what the Marines face sailing into this environment. A mine channel they must traverse in 2 confined lanes. Swarm boat attacks from 360 degrees as they approach the shore. Coastal cruise missiles launched from bunkers that survived 5 weeks of the heaviest American bombing since the Second World War. Drone swarms launched from hundreds of sites that cannot be pre-targeted because their locations are not fully mapped. And all of this in a waterway 21 miles wide, with no room to maneuver, no space to disperse, and no horizon to retreat beyond before the next wave arrives. General James Webb, a Marine infantry veteran and national security consultant, put it plainly when assessing the Keshem seizure option: you could insert yourself there to try to secure a base to operate out of, but that makes everybody on the ground targets for indirect fire of all kinds. His warning applied with even greater force to the Hormuz approach itself. The IRGC did not improvise this ambush, they set it and waited. The Millennium Challenge warning, Washington ignored. Here is the history that makes this failure so inexcusable. In 2002, the US military conducted a massive war game called Millennium Challenge. The scenario: a simulated American invasion of an unnamed Persian Gulf nation, clearly modeled on Iran. The Red Team commander, retired Marine General Paul Van Riper, employed exactly the tactics the IRGC used against the Marine force at Hormuz: asymmetric swarm attacks, coastal missile barrages, communications via motorcycle messengers and coded light signals to defeat American electronic warfare, simultaneous coordinated strikes from multiple vectors. The result: Van Riper sank 16 American ships, including an aircraft carrier, in the opening hours, killed over 20,000 simulated American troops. The Blue Team, the Americans, declared the exercise results invalid and restarted with constraints that prevented Iran from using its actual tactics. The Pentagon buried the lessons of Millennium Challenge, and in March 2026, those buried lessons came back to haunt 16,000 American Marines in the world's most dangerous waterway. The cost: what the ambush produced. I am not going to speculate on specific casualty numbers that remain classified. What I will do is analyze what the ambush produced strategically, because the strategic consequences are observable and they are devastating. The American amphibious force did not achieve its objectives. Kharg Island was not seized. The Strait of Hormuz was not reopened by ground action. The Iranian regime did not capitulate under the threat or the reality of American boots on Iranian soil. What did happen? American vessels were struck. American Marines were killed and wounded. The force that Trump had personally ordered, deployed the force that was supposed to provide his victory image, became instead the most visible symbol of American strategic overextension since Mogadishu in 1993. And the political consequences of that failure radiate outward in every direction. Let me go deeper on the specific weapon systems that made the ambush possible, because understanding the technology is essential to understanding why American military planners failed to account for it adequately. The anti-ship missile architecture, the backbone of Iran's anti-access capability in the Strait, is its coastal anti-ship missile arsenal, and it is more sophisticated than most Western audiences understand. The Nor missile, Iran's domestically produced variant of the Chinese C-802, is a subsonic sea-skimming cruise missile with a range of approximately 170 kilometers and an active radar seeker in the terminal phase. Sea skimming means it flies at altitudes as low as 5 to 10 meters above the water surface during its final approach, dramatically reducing the detection and engagement window for ship-based missile defense systems like the Phalanx close-in weapon system. At 5 meters altitude, a ship's radar horizon may only detect the incoming missile with less than 15 seconds of warning. The Qaeda missile extends that range to 300 kilometers. The NASA is a lighter, shorter-range weapon optimized for attacks on smaller vessels, including, specifically, amphibious landing craft approaching a defended shore. What makes these weapons especially dangerous in the Hormuz context is not their individual capability, it is the volume. The IRGC had pre-positioned hundreds of these missiles in hardened underground bunkers along the coastline and on the fortified islands before Operation Epic Fury began. Even after 5 weeks of American strikes, including the GBU, 7 two-deep penetrator attacks on underground silos on March, 17 U.S. intelligence assessed that the coastal cruise missile capability remained largely intact. The logic of this survival is straightforward. You cannot bomb what you cannot find. The underground facilities carved into the Hormuz coastal mountains were built specifically to exceed the penetration depth of the largest conventional bunker-buster bombs. And mobile launchers driven out of bunkers, fired and driven back in present, a targeting problem that no air campaign has ever fully solved. The IRGC's drone architecture, volume as a weapon. Iran's drone capability in the Hormuz theater is not primarily about any single sophisticated system. It is about volume, dispersion, and the mathematics of saturation. The IRGC operates from hundreds of launch sites distributed across the Iranian coast and the fortified islands. These are not large, detectable facilities. They are small, dispersed, camouflage positions, a pickup truck with a launch rail, a fishing shed concealing 6 shard-head airframes, a coastal cave with a control station. American intelligence can identify and strike fixed drone production facilities like the Haysa plant in Isfahan. It cannot systematically destroy hundreds of improvised launch sites dispersed across hundreds of kilometers of coastline. The strategic implication for an amphibious assault is brutal. Even if American air power maintains complete dominance over Iranian fixed-wing aircraft, and it does, the drone problem operates in an entirely different tactical space. A drone launched from a fishing boat 10 kilometers from the USS Tripoli does not appear on the same threat displays as a ballistic missile launched from a known site. It appears late, it flies low, and it arrives fast. During Operation Epic Fury, an American ANTPY-2 radar installation, one of the most advanced battlefield radar systems in the American inventory, was damaged by Iranian drone attacks. If a fixed, hardened radar installation with full electronic support can be successfully struck by Iranian drones, what does that say about the vulnerability of vessels maneuvering in confined waters? The answer is not comfortable. The mine threat. The weapon nobody talks about. Sea mines are the most unglamorous weapon in naval warfare. They are also, historically, among the most effective. During the Iran-Iraq War's tanker war in the 1980s, Iranian mines inflicted serious damage on American naval vessels in the Persian Gulf. The USS Samuel B. Roberts struck a mine in 1988 and nearly sank. The USS Princeton struck 2 mines in 1991 during the Gulf War, suffering severe structural damage. In both cases, Iran's mining operations proved more strategically consequential than its surface or air forces. In 2026, the IRGC employed explosive drone boats disguised as fishing vessels to deploy mines throughout the strait. The US military destroyed 16 Iranian mine layers on March 11, but confirmed mine laying had already occurred before those mine layers were eliminated. The narrow channel geometry of the Strait of Hormuz, 2 lanes in a 1-mile wide waterway, means that a relatively small number of mines can create a lethally uncertain transit environment. Minesweeping operations take time. They require specialized vessels operating at slow speeds in a threat environment. They cannot be rushed without catastrophic risk. Threading an amphibious assault force through an incompletely swept minefield while simultaneously under fire from swarm boats, coastal missiles, and drones is not a military operation that has a favorable risk calculus regardless of the quality of the troops executing it. The IRGC has known this for 40 years. The mine laying in 2026 was not improvised. It was the execution of a pre-planned defensive layering strategy developed precisely to deny American amphibious forces freedom of movement in the strait. The suicide skiff, asymmetric genius. One innovation deserves special mention because it illustrates the sophistication of IRGC tactical thinking in a way that the focus on high-end missile systems often obscures. Fox News reported on March 13 that Iran had deployed explosive suicide skiffs disguised as fishing boats in the Strait of Hormuz. These are small vessels indistinguishable from the thousands of fishing boats that normally operate in the Gulf, loaded with explosives and either remotely controlled or operated by a single martyr crew. The tactical problem this creates for an American naval force is profound. American rules of engagement require positive identification of a hostile vessel before engagement. A small boat approaching at speed is potentially a fisherman, a smuggler, a curiosity seeker. Until it is definitively identified as a threat, American commanders face a legal and moral constraint on opening fire. And the IRGC has spent decades studying precisely where those constraints lie and how to exploit them. The swarm tactic exploits this constraint at scale. 10 fishing boats approach simultaneously. 8 are genuine fishermen. 2 are suicide skiffs. The decision-making timeline for the ship's captain: identify, classify, authorize engagement, fire, is measured in seconds. The margin for error is 0. And the IRGC gets to choose when and where that dilemma occurs. This is not terrorism. This is sophisticated military doctrine, developed by an organization that has studied American operational vulnerabilities with the same dedication that American military academics study Iran. Donald Trump's decision to order the ground operation into Hormuz was driven by a political logic that was internally coherent but strategically blind to the military realities on the ground. Trump had set himself a 4 to 5 week timeline for Operation Epic Fury. That timeline was expiring. The air campaign had not produced a negotiated Iranian capitulation. The Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil flows remained closed, and oil at $114 per barrel was beginning to translate into political pain at American gas pumps. Trump's domestic political base was showing the first signs of war fatigue. The ground operation was designed to break the logjam, seize Kharg Island, cut off Iran's oil revenue, and either force the regime to the negotiating table immediately or demonstrate to Trump's domestic audience that the administration was taking decisive, visible action. What the political logic missed catastrophically was the military reality that Trump's own CENTCOM commander had warned about in the planning phase. The Washington Post had reported the primary challenge would not be seizing territory, but protecting U.S. forces once deployed. Military consultant James Webb had publicly warned that ground forces on Gulf Islands would be targets for indirect fire of all kinds. The Soufan Center had flagged that 2 MEUs and elements of the 82nd Airborne would be hard-pressed to control Kesh Malone, let alone conduct an opposed amphibious assault in a mined, missile-saturated environment. These warnings were registered and then overridden. The political need for a decisive action outweighed the military assessment of feasibility. This is not unprecedented in American military history. The decision to advance to the Yalu River in Korea in 1950, ignoring Chinese warnings and CIA assessments of Chinese intervention capability. The decision to dissolve the Iraqi army in 2003, ignoring State Department analysis of the consequences. The decision to surge forces in Afghanistan in 2009 without a defined end state. In each case, political necessity drove military action beyond what operational reality could support. The Hormuz operation is the latest entry in that catalogue. The Congressional reckoning. The fallout in Washington is moving with unusual speed by American political standards. Several dynamics are operating simultaneously. Trump had publicly promised that the operation would be completed within 4 to 5 weeks. That timeline has now elapsed, and rather than a victory image, the American public is watching wounded Marines being medevaced out of the Persian Gulf. The political optics are the opposite of what the operation was designed to produce. Defense Secretary Hegseth's declaration on March 5 that Iran's evil regime is crumbling and his invocation of no quarter, no mercy. A phrase that legal scholars immediately flagged as a potential violation of international law, prohibiting the killing of those who surrender now looks not just legally problematic, but militarily inaccurate. The regime has not crumbled. It has bloodied an American amphibious force. Republicans who championed the war, citing Trump's political instincts, CENTCOM's confidence, and the air campaign's initial success, are facing an uncomfortable choice. Continue supporting an operation whose ground phase has visibly failed, or create distance from a president who ordered it. Democrats who opposed the war from the beginning now have the most visible evidence yet that the foundational assumptions of Operation Epic Fury were flawed. And the intelligence community, already under scrutiny for its assessment that Iran lacked a credible ICBM program, is facing a second major analytical failure in the same conflict. The failure to adequately communicate to policymakers the full lethality of Iran's Hormuz area denial architecture and what it would mean for an amphibious assault. The allies who said no. There is one more dimension of the American strategic collapse that deserves specific attention because it illuminates the broader erosion of American alliance credibility that this war has accelerated. When Trump called on allied nations to take the lead in reopening the Strait of Hormuz, citing America's own energy independence from Gulf oil as justification for others to carry the burden, the response was devastating. Germany refused, Spain refused, Italy refused, Estonia refused, the United Kingdom refused, Australia refused, South Korea refused, Japan refused. The European Union, as an institution, rejected Trump's request. Spain went further, closing its airspace to American aircraft involved in the Iran war and barring U.S. forces from jointly operated military bases at Rota and Moron. 22 nations ultimately signed a statement expressing willingness to contribute to appropriate efforts to ensure passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The language was artfully non-committal. None of those nations committed combat forces to an operation that the originating power's own military had struggled to execute. The practical meaning: America entered the ground phase at Hormuz without the Allied military weight that every previous major American operation in the region, Gulf War 1991, Iraq 2003, had enjoyed. The coalition that made Desert Storm possible, the alliance architecture that America had built over 50 years, declined to participate. When the ambush came, the Marines who sailed into the killing ground did so largely alone. There is a quality of strategic patience in the IRGC's Hormuz defense that Western military culture fundamentally struggles to understand. American military doctrine operates on tempo, speed of decision, speed of movement. The OODA loop: observe, orient, decide, act, compressed to its minimum. American military culture prizes agility, firepower, and the initiative that comes from acting before the enemy can react. The IRGC's Hormuz strategy operates on a completely different timeline. It is built on 40 years of patient preparation, layered redundancy, and the willingness to absorb an initial American air campaign of any scale in the confidence that the second phase, the ground phase, would encounter the kill zone that had been waiting since before most of the Marines now in theater were born. This is not desperation. This is strategy. The IRGC planned for the air campaign. They hardened their underground facilities, dispersed their mobile launchers, pre-positioned their mines and swarm boats, and waited. They traded the surface navy, which they knew would be destroyed by American air power in the opening days, for the preservation of the coastal defense architecture that would be decisive in the ground phase. Former IRGC Navy Commander Alireza Tangsiri was killed by Israel on March 26. Within hours, Iran had a replacement in command. The institutional knowledge, the pre-planned defensive orders, the dispersed force structure, none of it died with Tangsiri. Because the IRGC does not build its strategy around the survival of any individual commander. It builds it around systems, redundancies, and pre-position capabilities that operate from pre-planned orders without requiring real-time command direction. This is what 40 years of preparation looks like when it is executed. The new Supreme Leader's message. Mojtaba Khamenei, elevated to Supreme Leader following his father's assassination on February 28, delivered his first public statement on March 6 with language that left no ambiguity about Iran's intentions. The lever of blocking the Strait of Hormuz must undoubtedly continue to be used. He did not call for negotiations. He did not signal a willingness to compromise on the Hormuz closure in exchange for a ceasefire. He doubled down. And the IRGC hardliners, who now effectively command Iran's wartime decision-making, represented by the appointment of Mohammad Bagher Zolgadeh, an IRGC general, as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, are not constrained by the pragmatic political instincts that figures like the now-dead Ali Larijani had brought to earlier phases of the conflict. The Iran that faced the amphibious assault at Hormuz was not a broken, desperate regime searching for an exit. It was a hardened, IRGC-dominated wartime state that had been preparing for exactly this moment for 4 decades. And the ambush was its answer to Trump's ground offensive. Let us be precise about what happened at Hormuz from the perspective of every nation watching. The United States, the world's sole remaining military superpower, with the largest defense budget in history, $1.5 billion per day burned through Operation Epic. Fury deployed 16,000 of its most capable fighters into the Strait of Hormuz in an amphibious operation against a nation whose conventional navy had been largely destroyed 5 weeks earlier. And Iran stopped them, not with a superpower's military, not with advanced stealth aircraft or nuclear weapons or a blue water navy, with mines, with swarm boats, with coastal missiles fired from underground bunkers, with drones launched from dispersed sites that no amount of American air power had been able to fully identify and destroy. The lesson that every general, every defense ministry, every strategic planning directorate absorbed in real time was this: if Iran degraded, besieged, financially strangled, its supreme leader dead, its air force grounded, its surface navy sunk, can stop an American amphibious assault in a 2-1 mile wide waterway, then the American military projection model has limits that the entire global strategic order should now be pricing into its calculations. China saw it. The People's Liberation Army planners studying Taiwan contingencies saw an American amphibious assault fail in conditions far less challenging than a contested Taiwan Strait crossing would present. Russia saw it. Putin, who has been watching American military power from the Ukrainian theater for 4 years, registered that the world's most powerful military cannot force a passage through the Strait of Hormuz against a non-peer adversary with 40 years of prepared defenses. North Korea saw it. Kim Jong-un's decision to develop and transfer Hwasong 2.0 technology to Iran, the subject of our previous analysis, looks even more strategically rational after Hormuz. A country that can stop American ground power and possesses an ICBM capable of reaching American cities is a country that has achieved genuine deterrence. And every country in the global south, the countries that have watched American military power reshape their world for 3 decades, saw a new data point. The American military is not omnipotent. It can be stopped. The question is whether you are willing to build the 40 years of prepared defenses that make stopping it possible. The Israel problem. Abandoned at the altar of American overextension, I want to close this section with what I believe is the most consequential strategic consequence of the Hormuz ambush. More consequential even than the American casualties. More consequential than the oil price impact. More consequential than the damage to American alliance credibility. Israel is now alone. Not literally, America has not withdrawn from the conflict, and air operations continue. But the strategic logic that justified Israel's co-launching of Operation Epic Fury has been fundamentally invalidated. Israel agreed to this, war supported it, participated in it, politically enabled it on the premise that American military power would do what Israeli military power alone could not: permanently eliminate Iran's ability to threaten the Jewish state. The air campaign would destroy the missiles. The ground campaign would seize the leverage points. Iran would capitulate or collapse. And Israel would emerge from the conflict in a more secure strategic position than before it started. Instead, Iran's missile capability, while degraded, is not eliminated. The coastal defense architecture that stopped the American amphibious force at Hormuz is the same architecture that can threaten Israel's offshore energy infrastructure in the Mediterranean. Iran's drone capability, thousands of one-way attack systems that survived 5 weeks of intensive strikes, remains a persistent threat to Israeli territory and American forward positions throughout the region. And the American political will to continue absorbing casualties in service of a war that was supposed to be quick is now visibly cracking. If Washington moves toward a negotiated exit, the outcome that CENTCOM privately acknowledged it could not guarantee against before the ground phase was even ordered, Israel is left holding a war it cannot end. A ceasefire that leaves Iran's regime intact, its Hormuz leverage preserved, and its deterrence architecture rehabilitated with North Korean ICBM technology. A strategic outcome that is worse for Israel than the pre-war status quo. This is what abandonment looks like in the language of geopolitics. Not a formal withdrawal of support, a gradual erosion of American will, accompanied by a negotiated exit dressed in diplomatic language. That leaves Israel exposed to a more motivated, more hardened, and more dangerously equipped Iran than existed on February 27th. The Houthi dimension, the second front opening. One additional element cannot be ignored in this global picture. On March 28, Houthi forces launched their first ballistic missiles toward Israel, opening a second front in the conflict. The Houthis, who had maintained a ceasefire with the United States regarding Red Sea shipping, announced they were joining the war of revival in support of Iran. The strategic implication is significant. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the choke point between Yemen and the Horn of Africa, through which 10 to 12% of the world's oil travels, is now under Houthi threat. If the Bab el-Mandeb closes alongside the Strait of Hormuz, approximately 30% of global oil trade is disrupted simultaneously. The economic consequence is already severe at $114 per barrel, with only Hormuz closed, become potentially catastrophic. And American forces that were already stretched thin managing the Hormuz ambush must now contemplate a two-choke point crisis with a second axis of Iranian proxy operations, adding to an already overwhelming operational burden. I want to close today's analysis with what I believe the evidence forces us to conclude not as speculation, but as assessment grounded in 40 days of observable operational reality. Truth 1. The American theory of victory in Operation Epic Fury was based on a flawed model of what Iran actually is. American planners modeled Iran as a conventional military adversary whose warfighting capability resided primarily in its missile stockpiles, air defense networks, and surface navy. Destroy those, the model predicted, and Iran's ability to resist would collapse. The Hormuz ambush demonstrated that this model missed Iran's most important military capability, a 40-year-old area denial architecture specifically designed to defeat American amphibious power, built into the geography of the strait itself, and survivable against any air campaign short of nuclear bombardment. Truth 2. Trump's political timeline drove the operational decision past the point where it was militarily executable. The 4 to 5 week timetable was a political constraint, not a military assessment. Military planners warned that the primary challenge would be protecting forces after deployment, not the initial seizure. Those warnings were overridden because the political cost of not acting looked worse than the military cost of acting. In the profession of arms, this is called political interference in operational decision-making. In history, it is called how empires overextend. Truth 3. Israel's strategic bet has failed, and the consequences are only beginning to unfold. Israel co-launched this war to achieve permanent security from Iranian threat. The Hormuz ambush demonstrates that Iranian threat capability, hardened, dispersed, and now augmented by North Korean ICBM technology, cannot be permanently eliminated by the military tools that were applied. Israel is now in a worse strategic position than before February 28th. Iran is more motivated, its IRGC is more dominant over political decision-making, its new leadership is harder line than the one that was assassinated, and it retains both the physical capability and the demonstrated will to continue the fight. Where this goes from here? The most likely near-term trajectory is a negotiated de-escalation that will be sold to domestic audiences in Washington and Jerusalem as something other than what it is. Iran will offer through Omani or Qatari intermediaries some form of nuclear program limitation. The United States will offer a cessation of military operations and gradual sanction relief. The Strait of Hormuz will reopen, oil prices will fall. Trump will declare victory. And Iran will emerge from this war with its IRGC dominant, its deterrence architecture intact, its Hormuz control capability demonstrated and validated, and a new supreme leader who has proven he can withstand the most intensive American bombing campaign in a generation and stop an American ground assault at his doorstep. That is not victory for America. That is not victory for Israel. That is the outcome of a war that was launched with insufficient understanding of what it would take to win. 40 years of IRGC preparation met 6 weeks of American air power and 3 days of American ground force. And the 40 years won. History, as it always does, had the last word. This has been the Jiang Report. I'm Professor Jiang Xueqin. If this analysis was valuable, share it. The algorithm does not promote content like this. Your share is how this channel reaches the people who need to hear it. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. Subscribe if you have not. And I will see you in the next video.